up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. It's that time of year when grad school is just kind of kicking into gear again, and I know a lot of you watching this channel are in that trainee phase of life and either just entering graduate school or you're in graduate school right now. And just like with private practice, as I reflect back on my grad school experience, there were a lot of things that I had to learn the hard way. So I thought it might be nice to share some of those tips I learned the hard way so that those of you just getting started in graduate school or who have been in graduate school for a bit can glean from my learnings. So stay tuned to hear 7 tips I wish I knew before starting psych grad school. Welcome to Private Practice Skills. I'm Dr. Marie Fang, psychologist in private practice. I post videos offering tools I learned the hard way about starting and growing private practice so that you don't have to. And sometimes I deviate and talk about things like psych grad school and, it's all relevant. All right, in all honesty, there are way more than just 7 tips that I wish I knew before graduate school, but these are just my 7 top tips that I wish I could have known sooner. And keep in mind that every grad program is different and every individual trainee is different. So these are just reflective of things that I wish I knew before I started grad school. Tip number 1 took me way too long to learn. In fact, it was still several years after grad school ended for me to get this one, and maybe I'm still working on it. So listen up. Tip number 1 is who you are is your biggest asset. What? When I was in grad school, I was always trying to kind of like mold myself to whatever I thought I was supposed to be or what I thought a therapist was supposed to be, or to try to be the model student, or I don't know, just fall in line with whatever the mold was for a therapist. But as it turns out, who you are is your biggest asset as a therapist, as a person. Leaning into your nuanced, unique differences are only going to serve you. I don't want to spend too long on each of these tips. I could probably make a whole video just on this tip, but suffice it to say that those nuanced differences that set you apart from other people and other therapists not only will allow you to stay grounded in yourself as you lean into those little quirks and such, but also those are the things that help you tap into your inner therapist, the part of you that can have empathy and care for other people. Because if you can care for yourself in your unique oddities and differences and quirks and still love them, then it'll be a lot easier for you to care for your clients in the future and empathize with their unique oddities and quirks as well. Tip number 2, grad school is not a race. I don't know why this seems like such rocket science, or at least to me, that just seemed like this wild idea at the time. I felt like I had to get out of graduate school ASAP, and it makes sense that we can feel that way because grad school is super expensive. The longer you're in grad school, the longer you're accruing school debt, delaying income, etc. And grad school is super hard. It could feel like you're sort of postponing the rest of life until grad school's over. And that is often why we race, not to mention all of the kind of anxious culture that can surround us. If everyone else seems to be racing, then, maybe we should just hurry up and get it done too. But may I propose that instead of seeing grad school as a race, that you allow as much of what's important to you in life to continue on while you're in grad school, even if that means that you might be doing your graduate program a little bit slower than everybody else. And piggybacking off of that idea, tip number 3 is to prioritize your own personal growth. Now, obviously, as a psychology graduate student, a huge component of your training is developing an insight and understanding and growth in yourself so that you can be better equipped to help other people through that process as well. Here's the problem. You kind of are expected to do it on this timeline, and you're forking out endless amounts of money to make it happen. And a lot of times it could feel like drinking water from a fire hose. It's just way too much personal growth all at once. So piggybacking from tip number 2, if you can kind of pump the brakes a little bit and make real space for personal growth, that will be to your benefit. I think for me, in retrospect, I probably postponed most of my personal growth until after grad school when it felt like, I could afford it and I had time for it. And that leads us to tip number 4, and that's to prioritize self-care. I've talked about this so many times in so many videos, but for whatever reason within the mental health field, even though our whole mission is to help other people with their personal growth and their self-care, somehow we've fostered a culture, at least in a lot of contexts, where self-care as therapists is not prioritized. It's almost like we need to forego our self-care so that we can help other people, and that just doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't work. So even though oddly and sadly it's countercultural to do so, please prioritize your self-care while you're in graduate school. That's going to help mitigate the possibilities of being a ball of anxiety like I was, or burning out, or growing cynical about the mental health field as a whole. You name it, I've seen it happen over and over again. Tip number 5, you don't need to know your specialty or theoretical orientation by the end of graduate school, let alone by the beginning. I don't know why this is a thing, and I don't know if it's still being perpetuated in grad programs, but at least when I was in grad school 10 years ago, this was like such a thing. Like first quarter of first year of grad school, it's like, so what's your theoretical orientation? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out how to be a therapist. And somehow there was this mentality of like, in order to figure out how to be a therapist, you need to start by knowing what your theoretical orientation is, or your primary theoretical orientation, and then you can somehow develop your skills. And that just absolutely doesn't make sense to me. Because then what ends up happening is you feel like you have to hone in on a specific theoretical orientation, and who you are as a therapist is all wrapped up in your capacity to nail that theoretical orientation. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all about using evidence-based treatments in the work that we do with our clients. I'm not suggesting you just make things up, but who we are as a therapist and the sort of ticket to our success in being able to help clients really lies in developing some core therapeutic skills that live outside of theoretical orientation. Once you have a sense of who you are as a therapist and how you tend to operate, it's much easier to see which theoretical orientations tend to fit well with who you are as a therapist, what your values are, and of course, making sure you're choosing theoretical orientations, or specialties, extra trainings that are evidence-based. Now, tip number 6, I've kind of started to touch on already, and that's don't give in to anxious culture. I can lean anxious as a person all by myself without any cultural influences, but the culture of graduate school really nurtured and fostered my anxious tendencies, where it could get really, really easy and tempting to lean into that sort of type A, gotta get things done, gotta be perfect mentality that, doesn't serve anyone well. Somehow that mentality seemed to be glorified in my grad school experience, and I don't think that's helpful. So feel free to go against the grain and don't lean into that anxious culture. You'll be just fine. Take care of yourself. Go at your own pace. I think I'm repeating some points that they just feel important, so I'm repeating them. And tip number 7, a little bit controversial, but guess what? Professors don't always give great advice, and sometimes they give pretty bad advice. Now, this isn't a bash on all professors, but it is really easy to kind of see anyone in the professor position as sort of like the almighty authority on all things therapy or whatever they're teaching on, and they're a human being. And often my experience of professors was that they gave me advice that maybe was advice they wish they had, but isn't necessarily the best advice for me, and especially since I wasn't trying to become, core faculty of a university. Some of the things they'd advise me to do would have been helpful if I was trying to do what they were doing, but actually I wanted to do something totally different. So you don't have to listen to the advice of your professors. That's the whole point. Seek their advice and take it with a grain of salt. And that rounds off my list of top tips for what I wish I knew before I went to grad school. And again, let me repeat that this is reflective of my personal experience in my specific grad training program. And for folks watching who've already graduated from their psych grad programs, I'm sure you have an array of different top tips that you wish you knew. If you are already out of graduate school as a therapist, then leave a comment letting folks know what you wish you knew before you started graduate school, because I know other people then end up scrolling through the comments and reading what advice you have, and it could be really helpful to hear from other people besides just me. Before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform and a whole bunch of other resources through their one membership. If you'd like to check out Therapy Notes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Or wherever you might be at in your training process, whether you're hoping to be a psych grad student someday, you're in grad school right now, or you've been done with grad school for years and years, I hope you found this video helpful, and ultimately that you feel validated that being who you are is what matters most, and taking care of yourself, prioritizing your self-care, etc., is what matters most, whether you're in grad school or not. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well. Of course, the baby wakes up as soon as I start filming. Hey there. And most importantly, that it's real, man.